His Old Self by Melanie White. Simon shuffled uncomfortably in the back seat of the cab, the wool of his suit pricking the damp flesh of his thighs. Not only was this bright March morning unseasonably warm, but he'd acquired a few pounds since the suit's last outing, so that when he sat down, his doughy legs strained the seams, like bakery loaves bursting their tins. He grimaced as the cab lurched over yet another speed bump down the narrow London street. Each hump apparently an invitation to the driver to accelerate and further challenge Simon's tailoring. He should have taken the tube, but he was so out of it he'd missed the train and arrived at Victoria already bedraggled, tossed about by the commuter tide, a bottle without a message. Felicity had doled out two £20 notes at the station, and now he was blowing half his allowance on cab fare before the day had even begun. Tension balled in the pit of his stomach as he watched the fare tick past 14. If they reached the hotel soon, he could still ask for a £5 change. The cab defied gravity around one more turn and jerked to a stop outside the hotel's grey stone mall, pitching Simon forward and out onto the street. Clutching his bag, he huffed up the carpeted steps, ridiculous carpet outdoors, and followed the laminated signs for registration, where a girl with a blonde ponytail was flirting with two pinstriped alphas. Simon eyed them sideways, waiting. In the old days, he would have pushed up to demand the attention he deserved. He ran a hand through his hair, still a thick, dark swirl. That was one thing that hadn't changed, thank God. The suits moved off, guffawing through a set of ballroom doors into the buzz within. Simon was gripped by an urge to flee, until he thought that he wouldn't know where to go or what to do. His life had revolved around the office, the pub, Friday night shags and Sunday footy for 15 years, before it morphed into the office, dinner with Felicity, and squalling nights of nappy changes. "They're about to start," said the ponytail, snapping Simon back to the present. Her biro tapped a long sheet of names. His gaze drifted to the gap between her shirt buttons, where a scalloped edge of peach lace fluttered against freckled flesh. "Would you like to register?" the girl asked, enunciating as if to a foreigner. "Yes," Simon said hurriedly. "Sorry, it's Sibley. Simon Sibley." "Firm?" No. It's just myself. Just here for me." The girl's mouth made a wisecracking twist. "Just here for fun, are you?" Simon flushed, darting a glance at the ballroom doors swinging ponderously closed. "If it's not too late." "Right, no worries," she said, back to business. She scanned the list, which was alphabetical by company. Allen and Overy, Freshfields, Kennedy's, and on through to Wattle and Willis, his old firm. Her pen slid past it, onwards into the blank space beneath. "Simon," she said, "here you are." She dug a name sticker and conference pack out of a pile. Her pen hovered. "So, I'll just put your name?" she asked. "You could add CEO me," he joked, instantly regretting it. The girl smiled, with pity this time. She wrote Simon Sibley on the sticker, filling up the space. The first speaker was being introduced as Simon squeezed through the doors. A brisk woman steered him to a seat at the rear of a row. He slid into it like an errant schoolboy, as the audience, a sea of suits, sent a wave of applause toward the podium, where a balding man, the first of many no doubt, was preparing to speak on Trusts Abroad, Filling the Local Gap. Felicity had booted him out of the house for this, signing him up without asking and presenting it as some kind of motivational field trip after 9 months of mounting despair. He'd been coasting as a senior associate for years, never doing quite enough to make partner, but still enough, he thought, to hang on to his job. He knew the clients, he'd billed the hours, it wasn't like he'd lost business. Apparently, he gleaned too late over Schadenfreude-laced drinks with Govinda Chowdhury, He'd been an obvious candidate for the job. After the initial shock, he'd spent a few strenuous months contacting headhunters and sending his CV round city agencies, confident his years of experience would count for something. But weeks, then months rolled by. Walking the dog started to take up half the day, to the point where he couldn't remember how to find time for anything else. He stopped feeling like a solicitor, though he would tell people that's what he was, if they asked. He was still a husband, but once the redundancy pay ran out, he could no longer consider himself a provider. Maddie, who'd just turned 2, didn't know what any of it meant. He was still daddy to her at that age, no matter what. But Alex was 6, and increasingly anxious about what was going on. At first, he'd been happy to see his father at home after school every day, an exciting turn of events, a partner for football on the lawn in the dying afternoon sun, someone likelier than Mum to grant permission for extra biscuits or television. Now, though, Simon had little energy for football. He shut the door to his study, ostensibly to job hunt, to work on his strategy, but really because he couldn't face the usual questions, the tentative looks and traces of fear. Felicity had started to talk to him about retraining, even about going back to work herself, though her old marketing salary amounted to about a quarter of what he used to earn. And that would make him, what, a house husband in perpetuity? The butt of jokes among his old friends, though he hadn't seen any of them for the last 4 or 5 months. One by one they drifted away, discreetly, as if skirting a dubious smell at a party. Simon tried to focus on the speaker. He felt like a fraud. What was the point of being here? To list it on his CV? Attendance at 2-day conference on the future of trusts. Well, he may as well endure it till lunch, then slope off in search of a pub. He felt a stab of guilt, and then resentment at the thought of Felicity shelling out money they could ill afford for the hotel room and the registration fee. He must try harder. She'd started talking about selling the house. The mortgage wasn't huge, but another 6 months and they'd be up shit creek. Anxiety settled over his brain like a paralysing gas. There wasn't a functioning human being in there anymore, just an empty vessel, devoid of purpose, useless as attic clutter. Simon hustled for the exit of the lunch break, checking into a lower floor room facing a whirring ventilation shaft. He dumped his bag and rode the lift back down, following the homing signal of the hotel bar. One G&T in, awaiting an usually off-limits burger and chips, he felt calmer and opened the conference programme. There was a talk that afternoon on estate planning, something he used to find relatively interesting. Perhaps he should try to introduce himself to the speaker, who was a specialist at Cadwallader, Wickersham and Taft. "Wibbles!" he heard dimly from afar, then a moment later at his side, where his arm was being grabbed. "Wibbly!" Simon froze at the bygone nickname, earned during his tenure as a 25-year-old trainee at Broadmoor and Bellevue, where he'd been publicly bawled out for a typo committed on a contract of biblical proportions. He'd done his best to control himself, but his tearful flight to the gents had been clocked. The nickname, and variations thereof, dogged him until he wangled a transfer to Wattle and Willis, a blessed downshift, 1 year later. "Simon Wibley!" crowed the angular figure, folding itself onto the bar stool next to him. Simon stared for a moment, then remembered. Alan something like Greer. One of the quieter chaps, at least at that time. Now he was rattling away, simultaneously ordering a drink, clapping Simon on the back and launching into traineeship reverie. "Remarkable to see you here," Alan was saying. "Must be, 20 yards? You look better than a whore after a jailbreak, you old dog." "Where are you now?" "Nowhere just at present," Simon said, taking a fortifying gulp of G&T. "Got laid off last year from Wattle and Willis." "Bloody hell!" Alan sat back, taking him in. "The bastards! Trusts?" Simon nodded. Alan had certainly changed. He'd been inclined to retract into his shell on group nights out back in the day. Now, it seemed, the tables had turned. "Why'd they let you go?" asked Alan, more serious now. Simon found himself pouring out the story, oddly grateful to retell it. 15 years in the department, the niche client base, the new bitch of a CEO and her favouritism of his rivals. Then, the seized economy, the clotted job market, the pressures at home. Alan nodded sympathetically. "Tell you what," he said, "I'm at A&O now. There's an opening for a junior guy. It's well beneath you, but given the way things are, you might like to consider it. I feel almost guilty. It's way below your previous pay scale, but my higher-ups would be thrilled to land someone overqualified, and perhaps it's worth it for you to get back in the swing of things." Simon stared. "Well, yes, I'm interested. Who should I contact?" "Just email me your CV," Alan shrugged. "I'm the one hiring, but if you want it, it's yours." "God, seriously?" Simon said, lurching from the bar stool. He clasped Alan's hand, pumping it mightily. Alan grinned at him, and Simon realised he was misting up. "No more of those wibbles, though," Alan said. Simon cleared his throat, working Alan's hand like a lever. No, absolutely not," he said, signalling the bartender. "Let me get you a drink. I've got to get back." Alan handed over a business card. "Come in next week. We'll get a drink then and go over the details." "Sure, great," Simon said, still dazed. He sat back down, watching Alan stride out. A successful lawyer, a busy man, climbing mountains, sealing deals. It would be him again. This time, he'd do it better. "Double," he beamed at the bartender, gazing happily around the bar. The blonde ponytail from registration was sitting nearby. He caught her eye and smiled, raising his glass. She looked surprised, then pleased, and raised her own back. Simon slid his torso across the bar. "I just got a job," he said. "That's great," she squealed. "Congratulations." Her eyelashes were incredibly long, fanning black and even. Simon stood up and moved around the bar. "What's your name?" he asked. "Vanessa," she said, reaching to scratch the corner of his name tag. "Simon." Up in his room, bending to kiss her, the thought that this was a one-off to celebrate, flashed across his brain. He wound her ponytail around his hand, and as she sank her fingers into his hair, he felt proud, once again, that he still had some. On the bed, he pushed up her skirt and felt the thrill of unknown flesh. He cast off his clothes as quickly as possible, still kissing her, trying to hide his sagging paunch. Her legs wrapped around him, and he looked down at her body, the body now moving beneath him. The peach silk of her slip was still bunched up around her chest. He looked back up at the dark headboard, the pale wall. He moved faster, hurrying to the end, to get back to the point where he could get back to being himself.